Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Revamped Founder. In this episode, we have Anthony Pompliano joining us. Anthony, popularly known as Pomp, is a US Army veteran, having served the Army for 6 years and spending well over a year in Iraq. After Army, Anthony began on his entrepreneurship journey and became a prolific investor and an incredible investor actually. He started his own podcast, Pomp Podcast, and decided his daily letter, which he till date writes to well over 250,000 investors all over the world. He is very well versed in the topics of finance, cryptocurrencies, investing, and so much more. In this episode, we talk about what are some leadership lessons which Anthony learned in the military and which can be inculcated in a founder's life. We talk about his obsession about staying happy. We also talked about what makes a great leader. We talked about how can founders improve their communication skills and so much more. This is an incredible episode. I hope you enjoy it. Do listen to it to the very end. Thank you. So hey Anthony, how are you? I hope you're doing well. Now I don't know whether I should call you Anthony or Pomp, so I'll go with the first one. But yeah, alright, so what do you think is the biggest thing that you've learned from Hidden Genius, Paulina's book?
So my wife wrote a book called Hidden Genius. It has now become a bestseller. She did a fantastic job with it. I read it multiple times, some because I had to, other times because I wanted to. But I would say that there's a number of different takeaways. One of the most interesting ones is this idea of an alter ego. So many of the most famous people in the world have used alter egos to essentially fuel their rise. So Beyonce, known as Beyonce in kind of the real world, but before she would go on stage, she had this alter ego that she called Sasha Fierce. And she would say, hey, I'm not Beyonce, I'm now Sasha Fierce. She'd go on stage, she would perform. And it was a way to kind of protect her ego, to protect, any of her insecurities. Kobe Bryant, similar thing, known as Kobe Bryant, but had the alter ego of Black Mamba when he would step onto the court. And so I think that's kind of a pretty interesting thing. The second thing is when you go and you study some of these successful people, and success is not just measured in economic gain, but can be just in accomplishments or kind of persistence towards a goal, you realize how hard it really is. And so one of the stories in the book is about Francis Ngannou, UFC heavyweight champion. He basically was going from his home country and trying to get to Europe, and then eventually wanted to get to the United States. And as he was crossing the ocean multiple times, or crossing the sea, he would get stopped by their equivalent of the Coast Guard and brought back and dropped off into the desert. And so you see these stories and you're just like, man, if I was in that situation, do I have the mental fortitude? Do I have the persistence and the determination to really go for the goal? And so it's a pretty special thing to see that people are willing to do that. It makes their success after kind of the struggle that much sweeter.
So who do you look up to in terms of all the things that you laid out with regard to the book? Who is that one person who inspired Anthony Pompliano?
I don't think there's one person. I tend to think that there are different people in different aspects of life. So there are folks that I know who nobody would know their name, and I think that they're great fathers. And so I was like, hey, I aspire to be like that person in terms of being a dad. There are people I know that are fantastic friends, and I say I aspire to be like that person, kind of the friend role to my friends. There's people in business, there's people in investing, et cetera. And so when you kind of look at it, it's less about there's one person who inspires me, and it's more about there's an entire army of people, just different parts of my life. I look for inspiration. Sometimes they're very well-known, famous people, and the stories are out there. But also many times it's people who no one's ever heard of before. And I think that kind of a great example of this in practice is there are people I know who are some of the happiest people in the world. And they have, by most people's measurement, very little success, but they're happy. And so maybe in some way they're actually more successful because they're able to, kind of enjoy life. I have friends that have immense success and wealth, and they are some of the most unhappy people I know. And so really it's trying to figure out, what are you optimizing your life around? What are the roles that you want to fill in your life as a father, as a husband, as a brother, as a friend, as a business person, an investor, et cetera, and then go find the inspiration in each one of those roles that you then can try to emulate. And if you do that, you usually end up improving over time.
So do you consider yourself happy?
That's the only thing I ever really focus on. Many people would say that I've made decisions in my life that are completely irrational, but it's because they ended up making me happy. And in some weird way, really, I measure that as the success metric. If you can go through your day and at the end of the day say, I really enjoyed today, then to me, that is success. Yes, of course, money is important, accomplishment is important, relationships are important, but in some ways, those things may actually drive happiness. And also, I would say, if you can be happy, it's usually contagious. And so the happier you are, the happier the people around you tend to be. And so what ends up happening is you get this positive feedback loop. If you're happy, people around you are happy, the people around you make you happier. And so you, as a group, continue to kind of improve and be more optimistic and positive as you go through life.
Yeah, for some people, it does not hold any value. I mean, their work is what makes them happy.
So that's true for some people, right? I always say that I really don't have that many hobbies, right? I basically, everything that I do is focused around business. I kind of look at it like a professional athlete. A professional athlete wakes up and all they think about is how can they get better at their sport? I treat business the exact same way. And business to me encompasses both entrepreneurship and investing. But how can I learn more? How can I put myself in a better position? How can I take care of my body and my mind to be in a better kind of state so that when I make decisions or when I'm doing things, I have longevity to my career? And so if you think of it as I am a professional business person or a professional investor, you start to make different decisions in your quote unquote off time. And so, I don't drink alcohol. I spend most of my free time reading books. I treat it like it is that professional job. And so some people would be like, that sounds horrible. Like, I love to go out on Friday nights and get drunk, or I love to, go and do things that would be non-conducive to the success of my business or investing career. For me, it's no, like that is what actually makes me happy. And so I'm very fortunate to be able to kind of overlay what I do for a living, what makes me happy, and also in these quote unquote hobbies that may not seem like normal hobbies to other people, they reinforce happiness in my career. And so it ends up being this kind of thing that I'm proud of this life that I can build and kind of continue to pursue.
So was happiness your priority ever since you started out? You joined the army. So in army, how can people be happy?
I mean, listen, usually people who have been in the army are actually some of the happiest people. There's this very weird situation where obviously there's a massive problem with mental health of veterans who have been deployed. PTSD is a very real thing. There's over 20 U.S. soldiers per day that are veterans that are committing suicide. And so there's this like pandemic of negative mental health. The flip side of that, though, is that there's many people who went and they essentially have to get comfortable with their mortality, right? And I was one of those people where when I went overseas, you see a world that you are not normally exposed to if you just live in a country that is not at war. And so by going and having that experience and then coming back, I realized probably one of the key insights, which is that we all die. And so if you go back and you read Stoic philosophy, if you go and you look at people who write memoirs, if you look at autobiographies, all this stuff, at some point people begin to realize, oh shit, I die. And so I was very fortunate that I was able to kind of have that experience at 20 years old. And so for the last, 15 years, I've lived my life understanding that is the end game here. And time is this very valuable asset, but also it can't just be, go and do everything possible to kind of make sure you don't waste a second. Sometimes in wasting time, you're actually enjoying it. And so getting that happiness is a key component. And how do you find happiness? For me, it was just understanding like none of us get out of this alive. So you might as well be happy and enjoy things while you're here.
That's such a good point. But do people develop a fear of death? Or do they have?
Yeah, some people are scared of dying. I frankly don't know, anyone who doesn't wonder what happens or when is it going to happen or is it painful or, should I fear it or should I embrace it? Like there's all these different emotions. And it's a very weird thing because every single human in the world at some point in their life will face those emotions. But it is kind of this personal journey. And so some people are very, very afraid of it. Some people are very at peace with it. Sometimes the same person may have feared it and now they're at peace with it. Other times, there's even stories of people who are very at peace with the idea of dying for most of their life. And then as it becomes imminent, they become more scared of it. And so I tend to think that regardless of where you are on that spectrum, you don't get to cheat the game of life, right? You are going to die. And so the sooner that you can kind of realize that mortality, it does kind of light this fire under you to go and enjoy life and do things that make it exciting and enjoyable so that you find as close to happiness as you can find for yourself.
Oh, that's such a good point. So, army changed you emotionally. What do you think in terms of what you learned in the army that you wish more investors and founder have?
Yeah, look, I think that there are certain qualities of soldiers that get instilled through the process of training in the military. And so, the military training process essentially is they try to break you down and then they try to build you back up. And when you're going through it, you even kind of know they're doing it, but you're not excited about it. It sucks. It's not fun. There's different levels to it, right? Obviously, if you're just kind of an entry level person versus maybe somebody in the special forces, Navy SEALs, etc. But that's really military training: is break people down, build them back up in the image of what they want soldiers to be able to shoot, move, and communicate. Do it in large teams or small teams, and be able to do it on the battlefield under uncertainty, stress, and kind of a lack of information. And so when you look at that, there are a couple of core components or kind of skills that are instilled in people. One is leadership. Whether you are literally the cook or you are a special forces soldier, they try to instill leadership. I was very fortunate to go to a number of leadership schools in that military training, and you understand, yes, there are some people who just naturally have an inclination for being a leader, but there is also very much a skill set that can be taught to someone. And as you go and you instill leadership in an individual, what you find is they carry themselves differently. They act differently with those around them. They also begin to take those leadership skills and teach those around them those same leadership perspective. And so it ends up kind of, again, being contagious and spreading throughout an organization. Good leaders create good people, and those good people then reinforce the good leader. Another thing is the ability to deal with fear or uncertainty, to kind of have courage. And when you look at that, a lot of times it's just exposure. If you've never been exposed to a situation, it is easy to be fearful of it. It is easy to get scared. It is easy to lack courage. But then after you've been exposed to it, you very quickly realize it's not that bad, right? You can always think of kind of like a roller coaster for a young kid. The first time that they look at it, they're like, I can't go on that. Then they go on it, they're like, well, I didn't die. That shit was kind of fun. So let's do it again, right? The exposure actually leads to kind of an increase in courage. And so the military does a fantastic job in training of exposing you as best they can to situations that mimic combat. Yes, you know that they're not going to kill you in the training, but I can tell you that there was times where we'd go through training and then later on we'd be in the exact same situation, kind of in reality, in a combat zone, and training took over, right? I've told the story publicly before, but the first time that an IED went off while we were in Iraq, all of a sudden you just heard, a huge explosion. And before I could even think, before anyone else could even talk about what was going on, immediately people all started screaming out, IED, IED, IED. And the reason was because in training, they had taught us the second that this happens, immediately alert everyone that it's gone off. And so the training took over. And then afterwards, you're like, man, all of that stuff that sucked in training worked. I'm thankful to them for taking the time, effort, and putting all this money behind training us so that we can be in a situation where we can actually thrive on the battlefield. Same thing in business, same thing in investing. Expose yourself to as many of these situations as possible so that when you meet it in reality, you are as prepared as possible. There will always be nuance. There will always be situations where you don't get it perfectly, but the more prepared you are, the better you'll perform under kind of the gun or in the moment.
So talk a little bit about leadership there. So what do you think have you learned a quality which incredible leaders have, which more founders should maybe learn or inculcate?
I think leadership is one of these very weird kind of qualities where people have a view as to what a leader is. But when you actually start to unpack it and study leadership, what you find is that leaders are many different things. So sometimes there are moments where leaders need to lead from the front. Let's say that, use kind of the extreme example of the battlefield. Sometimes you actually need the leader in the front of the pack and charging forward, because what that does is it shows the courage and it allows other people to emulate it and say, well, if that man or that woman is going to go do this, I'm going to follow. But then other times, let's say when you go to the chow hall and you're eating, the leader eats last. And so you can't put a blanket statement on it and say that a leader is always in the front or a leader is always in the back, because actually it all depends on the context or on the environment. And so on the battlefield, the leader may be on the front, but in the chow hall, they may be in the back. Another quality is sometimes a leader has to be authoritative and has to sit down and tell people, I know you're scared right now, but this is the plan. This is what we're going to do. You're going to listen to me, and we're going to go and we're going to execute. But other times, a leader may have to actually lead, not through authority, not my rank is higher than yours, but they may have to actually lead through motivation. And so when you have to motivate people to do something, one of the definitions of leadership is to get people to do something that they wouldn't have otherwise done. And so now all of a sudden you can compare on the battlefield where it's very authoritative and it's I'm in charge of you, you do what I say because I'm the person who's responsible for the success or failure of this mission, compared to, let's say, the business environment. Many times what you have to do is, even if you're someone's boss, you still have to motivate them to be able to do something. And so having the ability to switch back and forth between authoritative and motivating leadership is a key quality. A third thing is sometimes you have to be directed. You have to do a lot of talking. Other times you have to do a lot of listening. And so being a leader is not only having the qualities of where to be, front or back, how to lead in terms of authoritative or motivating, or what to be doing in a situation, talking or listening. It's actually having the context and the emotional maturity to know when to do what. And so when I think of leadership, it's this idea of essentially a winner, right? When I see people on the internet always debating, are they an entrepreneur? Are they an investor? Are they a creator? It's like, listen, they're a winner. You can take that person and put them in a lot of different situations. They're going to find a way to win. Leadership is very similar. It doesn't matter if you're leading 12-year-olds, whether you're leading 60-year-old women, or you're leading a bunch of 35-year-old hardened special forces soldiers. At the end of the day, if you have the quality of leadership, you can be put in any of those environments and you'll be able to figure out a way to motivate them to accomplish what the goal is and to do so with their best interest at heart. And so I just tend to think that leadership is this really, really important quality that people tend to kind of, wave their hand at and say, that's kind of a woo-woo soft thing. But at the end of the day, leaders matter. And if we have more people who have that leadership quality in our society, we'll probably be better off.
So if a person is starting a company, he obviously has a few employees, or let's call them teammates. So how does he motivate people who are not driven by what they do?
You probably can't. If people aren't motivated by what they do, you probably need new people, right? A key component of leadership is to also understand, do you have the right people? Now, if you have to use those people, then what you've got to understand is what motivates them. How does this person get motivated? Are they motivated by money? Are they motivated by equity? Are they motivated by the mission? Are they motivated by, I recently was talking to someone, this great example, and I asked them, I said, this person's been doing their job for 35 years. They've been in a specific industry doing it for 35 years. They're very, very well recognized for the success of what they do. And I asked her, I said, what do you want your legacy to be? And she surprised me because I thought that she would want her colleagues and people at work and everything to know that she was good at her job. And she said, I was a single mother. My son is 35 years old. And I want in this business community, when he talks to people, them to say, your mom ended up helping me do X. I did Y because of your mom. This thing Z happened because of your mom. She was like, that's what I want my legacy to be. And so now all of a sudden I understood every single decision that this woman is making at this point in her career is all about how can she fulfill the goal of having a legacy that her son could be proud of. And so by understanding that one detail, you better understand that person, which means that you now can be better at motivating or leading that individual. And so every single person has something different. And so what you have to do in terms of motivating people is whether you can get new people or not, if you understand who this person is, you will find a way to motivate them. And if you can do that correctly, they will then be bought into whatever the mission is. And that tends to create better teams and better outcomes.
Yeah, but like you gave the example of the mother, some people have a compulsion to do things which they don't want to do. I think sometimes, go ahead.
Some people are intrinsically motivated, right? I would say that for somebody like me, if you tell me that there's a goal, you don't need to tell me a lot more, right? You don't got to tell me, hey, you got to be up at 5 o'clock in the morning and we got to go do A, B, and C before 7. And then at 7 o'clock, we're going to do this. I actually probably don't operate very well in that environment. Instead, though, if you tell me what the goal is, I'll have it all done by the time you wake up. And then you'll say, wait, what happened? And I'm like, well, you told me what the goal was. I went and I accomplished it. And so that's an intrinsic motivation, right? I actually don't really put that much time or effort or kind of energy in like, what do other people think? What are the accolades? What is the response from other folks? At the end of the day, I want to go to sleep and I want to say, I'm proud of the effort I put in today. I'm proud of what I accomplished today. And so when you have that intrinsically, that's really, really effective. But there's some people who don't have that. It's not good or bad. It's just different. And so for those individuals, they may need more structure. They may need more direction. And so it's like a basketball team, right? You can't have everyone be a point guard. You can't have everyone be a center. You need somebody who brings the ball up the court. You need somebody who shoots a three-pointer. You need somebody who's under the basket to get rebounds and dunks. And so by building a team, what you find is that each one of those unique individuals fills out the roster, and then you are better prepared to go and take on whatever the goal of the mission is.
How do you create a winner team? From what you have seen at startups which have done relatively well, what do you think do their teams have which others don't?
Winning teams are made up of winners, right? It's pretty simple. Like if you go and you find people who are winners and you put them all on the same team, they figure out how to win. And it's because they're very adaptive, they're very usually motivated, and they understand sacrifice. And so when you go back to kind of that leadership conversation, we talked about a leader being at the front on the battlefield, but in the back at the chow hall. Well, why is the leader sitting at the back? Because the leader understands everyone else should eat first, right? And so same thing is when you get a team of winners together, what you find is that actually they compete to who can get stuff done. Hey, we have 3 tasks today. We got 5 people. Guess what? They get pissed if they can't work on the project. And so by putting together these winners, you have kind of a higher capacity for work. You have people who are able to go and really work hard without thinking that it's work. And so that's probably one of the biggest things is if you want to have a winning team, you got to go find winners. It's all about the quality of the people. The second thing is leadership, right? You got to have a very clear mission. You have to have a very clear kind of vision of where you want to go. And you have to reiterate that over and over and over again. And some people kind of, laugh or shake their head at this, but I literally think that when you have a very clear, important mission, every single person should be able to repeat it on command. And what I mean by that is if you walk by somebody in the hallway and you say, hey, what's the company's mission? If they don't know, there's a breakdown in communication somewhere. There's a breakdown in leadership. And so how do you just continue to reinforce that every single thing you do? How do you make decisions and point back to what is the actual mission of this versus, maybe something else another company's done? And then the third thing that I would say is you have to trust each other. So if you get high quality people, you've got good leadership. The last thing is trust. And that trust really can only come with 2 things. One, past experience. There was a situation, again, go back to the battlefield, right? If all of a sudden there's a firefight that breaks out and someone's caught in the middle and someone runs out and exposes themselves to danger and saves that person's life, there's pretty high trust there, right? I've seen what happens in a high stress, dangerous situation. You're willing to put your life on the line for me. It's pretty hard for me not to trust you. The second thing, though, is that you can build trust through repetition. And so if you go and, again, using the military analogy, we just extend it, is many times what people will do is they will just repeat over and over and over and over again the same drills. Why do they do that? Because I've literally done this with you 2,000 times. And I know when I go in the room and I go right, you're going to go left. No matter what happens, if I go right, I know you're not going straight. I know you're not going right, you're going left. Why do I know? Because I've done it 2,000 times with you. We can literally do it blindfolded. I trust you. And so obviously that's something in the physical world that is, kind of military specific. But if you go and you look at it in the business world, how do you begin to build trust with people? Through repetition. And so there's a huge, kind of body of work of just like, how do you drive as many iterations and repetitions with a team so that you continue to get that positive feedback loop and trust is earned over time. I think in Hidden Genius, Planet talks about the idea of like compounding trust, right? And you build it up over time. So yes, today I may trust you a little bit more than I did yesterday because I asked you to go get me something for lunch while you were out getting your lunch and you did it. Small thing, but those small things add up over time. And so then if in 2 weeks I ask you, I say, hey, you know what? I'm really tired. I'm going to take a nap. Is it possible? Can you just finish coding up this file for me and then I'll finish it tonight, whatever you don't get through? If I wake up and you didn't do it, I lost a little bit of trust, right? But if I wake up and you did it, I gained some trust. And so those compounding pieces of trust over a long period of time is how you really build a special team.
So you talked a little bit about repetition there. So I found an interesting thing. I looked up the word relentless, which you swear by. So it has 2 meanings. A, persistence, but the other one, which is exactly opposite to it, inflexibility. So do you think there's a correlation between these two?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to this idea of leaders need to know when to be in the front and when to be in the back, right? When you're relentless, you need to know when to push through, but also when to go around the obstacle. And so there's this very kind of interesting idea. If you look at like a Bruce Lee, he talks, be like water, right? Just flow around the obstacles, figure out a way to do it. But then if you go and you look at certain situations, maybe like an Elon Musk, right, with SpaceX, I have a very specific view of the world and I'm going to go implement my will on the world and make it a reality. Well, actually, what you need to be able to understand is within that implementation of his will, he did go around obstacles sometimes, but other times he busted through them. And so being relentless is not just put your head down and run as fast as you can through every wall. Instead, what it is understand what the end goal is and relentlessly try to get to that end goal and achieve it. And so sometimes that's a straight line right through every obstacle. Other times that's going around those obstacles. Sometimes in the same journey, you may have to do both. But if you are relentless, you will find a way. And so I like to think of relentless is, kind of a precursor to being resourceful. You have to be resourceful in order to be relentless. And so as you're kind of going and understanding what is it that I'm trying to accomplish, if you can have that persistence and dedication to the end goal, between where you start and where you end, there's a whole lot of uncertainty. And I think that's where entrepreneurs really thrive because they're used to being kind of resourceful and figuring things out rather than having just, almost like ingredients if you're cooking, right? It says, hey, go get 1 teaspoon of this, go get, a quarter teaspoon of this. It's just simple instructions. And if you follow the instructions, you get the results. Most entrepreneurs don't like that type of stuff because they actually enjoy the journey of figuring it out along the way.
Yeah, funny story. When I started out the podcast, so I built a mic for myself. Figured out that earphones, the piece that is kind of bulged out is the microphone of the whole thing. So I cut the part above it and I plugged it in. And yeah, I think
you're telling me that right now you're doing this interview with a microphone that you built yourself.
Yeah,
you're going to be a winner in life. Right? Like, just think of how crazy that is. That is insane. You know what I did? This microphone I'm using right now, I went on Amazon and I bought it, right? Like a lazy, stupid person. But you figured out, you said, I'd need a microphone, and you figured out all the different components and you built yourself your own microphone. That is a perfect example of relentless and resourceful and understanding what you needed to do to be able to do these interviews. It's incredibly impressive.
I'm glad. Yeah, that's incredible. All right, so I'll pivot a bit here. So you've invested in a lot of companies, most of them which have done very well. How do you get to know the founders? Is it through cold outreach, warm intros? How does that take place?
It's all different ways. Sometimes I reach out to people. Sometimes I get introductions. Other times they seek me out. It could be many, many different ways. I would say it's not so important kind of how I first come across them. What's really important is when I talk to them. And what I found most is not even to spend that much time talking about, kind of whatever I want to talk about. I'll just talk about whatever they want to talk about. They've been thinking about this stuff for a long time, and I'll ask questions and I'll kind of disagree and I'll push back and start trying to understand, how does this person think? Why do they think what they think? And how convicted are they in what they think? And so what you're really trying to underwrite is just, are they a good decision maker? Do they have high conviction and understand something that the rest of the world doesn't understand? And if they are given the opportunity to go after this, whether it's because they get investment or because they find a way outside of getting an investment from other people, are they going to be able to recruit the right team, build the right product, and ultimately drive revenue? If you think that they can have a higher probability of doing that stuff than not, it's usually worth a shot given the power law of venture capital.
And do you look at track records?
No. Like, track record can be both a great telltale sign of somebody's ability, but also can be a great liar, right? There are plenty of people I know who were hyper successful with their first company, and the second one was absolute shit. And the reason was because they got rich off the first one, right? They didn't have that fire. They didn't have that motivation anymore. And so people invested because they're like, well, they did one, here's the second one. And so it's still, I think you have to reevaluate the individual every single time and understand not just who they are as a person, but where are they in their life, right? Are they actually ready to kind of run into the fire and go bang their head against the wall and go do how hard this is going to be? Can they withstand it? Or are they going to quit? If you're rich, building a company is maybe even harder because you have the constant ability to put your own money in, so you can be somewhat lazy in terms of making sure you're building the right thing or have the right metrics, all that kind of stuff. And then 2 is you always have the escape of, I already got money. I don't need to be doing this, right? I'm going to go do whatever else I want to do. And so in some weird way, some of my favorite times in my life have been when your back's up against the wall. You have no other option than to succeed. And so when that happens, you just act very differently. You have a very different kind of light under you than, let's say, when things are going well and you've got lots of options. And so I think track record is a data point. Obviously, you want to understand it, but you can't make investment decisions based on somebody has a good track record or even somebody who's a bad track record, right? Somebody could have failed trying the same idea time and time and time and time again, and then the one time they hit it, and here we go. And so one of the big, kind of difficulties in early stage investing is you may have seen the same idea tried 10 different times by 10 different founders. And the 11th one, you're like, and the other ones, I don't know. And then it's Facebook, right? And you're like, oh, I had written off social networks, and then here comes Facebook. So you have to always kind of reevaluate from scratch, who's the person, what's the opportunity, and can this actually have a high probability of success?
So do you think that if Musk builds a company which is not needed that much by people, will it succeed?
You can make anything succeed, right? If you told me go outside and sell lemonade right now, I'll figure out a way to make it successful. Now, it may not be the biggest business in the world, but I'll figure it out. But is that the thing that's worth spending your time on, right? How important is that to the world? And I think one of the things that Elon has done a fantastic job of is only working on the hardest problems. And he's able to articulate them in a way that really inspires people, whether that's potential employees to come work there, whether that's investors to give him capital, or it's customers who want to be associated with the things that he's doing. So I think that his kind of secret is not so much just his ability to execute, it's that he's only really picking the hardest things to work on and then basically saying to himself, I'm also going to be able to articulate this in a way that inspires other people to rally around the cause to help me accomplish what I want to accomplish.
And he's a great leader in some sense, but in the other thing, I was talking to a founder yesterday. I don't know if you know him, Jason Fried. He wrote Rework. But so in his company, Jeff Bezos invested in the starting stage. But Jeff does not create a good environment for the employees to work in. Very strict working conditions. So do you think that type of leader is desired by people?
I don't think there's anything such as good culture or bad culture. I've worked in companies that I've thought were amazing. And I'm like, I can't believe that people don't want to work here. And then I've worked in companies where I absolutely hate this place. It's a horrible culture. But guess what? In those situations where I thought it was a horrible culture, there was someone sitting next to me who thought it was an amazing culture. And so what I've come to the conclusion of is there's no such thing as good or bad culture. Is there a match between the person in the culture and the culture of the business? Every business has a culture, but when you put someone in it, it's either a match or it's not. If it's not a match, then that person will walk away saying that's a bad culture. But there may be someone else in that exact same team that's like, this is an amazing culture. And so what you're really looking for is the match, not so much we want a good culture or a bad culture.
Glasgow just lost its value. No, I'm just kidding. So when you invest in early stage companies, do you look at the exits when you talk to the founder and when you hear about the company?
I may be weird, but when I invest in a company, I hope they never sell, right? If it works, why do we want to sell it? Why do we want to get rid of it? Let it compound for as long as possible. If you could go back and, take in the traditional world, Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway, if you sold at any point, it was a bad decision. They continued to compound capital. If you go and you look in the tech world, for example, even something like a Facebook, right? It continued to compound capital for a very long period of time. And so sure, it'll go through transactions, it'll raise more money, it'll go public, right? There may even be transactions in the public market, but I tend to think that the best businesses, you actually never want to sell. And so, yes, I want to invest. And if we're using outside capital, we want to return capital to investors. If we're using our own money, we've got more flexibility. the end of the day, I want to buy equity in businesses that we never want to sell because they're that good.
I think I look at it the same way. I mean, I'm not saying I'm an investor or anything, but I think good companies, there is no need to sell them. They either become big or they die. That's how
Of course. And that's the power law of venture capital, right? Is this thing that has a very low probability of working. If it does work, though, to be highly valuable. And so you're looking for that asymmetry.
So one thing related to this, do you think a person, a founder who tries multiple times, there's like, you have to build 10 startups before you succeed. Not every time, but most of the times what we see. Do you think that founder has a higher chance of succeeding than others?
I think that it's very hard to underwrite what's the probability of success for a founder in the early stage of a company, because there's so many different factors, not only today, but also things that will change over time. And so when you start out, you may pitch investors on, A, but then all of a sudden competitors change, markets change, maybe laws change, technology changes, and you end up building, B, C, or D. And so what you really got to be able to do is you got to be adaptive. And that's why so many early stage investors that have great track records say you want to invest in the person. Because at the end of the day, the product, the market, the competitors, the funding environment, all that stuff may change. But if you bet on the right person, they'll navigate it. They'll figure it out. And it goes back to our conversation earlier. They'll be relentless and they'll be resourceful.
Yeah.
They'll figure out a way to get to that kind of end result, which is a successful business that solves someone's problem. Listen, you got to keep at it, right? And the more that you try and does it work, it just means that you're one step closer to figuring out what is going to work.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll get to the last part, then we'll end it in a bit. You are a pretty good communicator. So how do you think should people improve on the communication skills in general and present their ideas in a formative way?
I think communication is one of those single most important things that humans do. You communicate with everyone in your life, right? I communicate with my child, with my wife, with my brothers, with people that I work with people external to our organizations. Communication is literally everything. And it's not just verbal. It's also written communication. It's nonverbal communication in terms of body language, et cetera. And so being able to figure out how to do that is really valuable. And the way that you figure out how to get better at it is you practice. And yeah, sure, some people are like, oh, I went and I read a book and it told me what to say. I don't necessarily think that's the best way to do it. One of the best things that you could do is just walk up to people and start talking to them, right? And you're going to quickly figure out, like, either people are receptive or they're not. They are intrigued or they're not. And you'll start to learn and understand, how do you communicate with people? I had the great fortune of, I grew up in a family of 5 boys. And so we did a lot of communicating, sometimes under stress, sometimes in good times, but we did a lot of communicating. We did a lot of arguing and debating and trying to get our points across and convincing each other to do certain things. And so again, it was very fortunate where I had, call it 15, 18 years of my life where I was living with them and we just constantly were talking all the time. And so it allowed us to perfect communication as best we could. And then when I got out into the real world, I realized I probably had a little bit of a head start on people because of that. But I still actively work at it today, right? I think that there's a bunch of stuff. If I watch this interview, I'll say, man, I say like too much, or I say too much, or my hands are all crazy because I'm Italian, right? Whatever it is, there's ways that you can do things that are better. And so if you just constantly look to improve, you will.
Yeah, so how do you, when you, let's say you play this video again, how will you evaluate yourself on what things you missed out and what you can improve on? I do this too. I listen to previous recordings that I think, how can I improve on it?
Yeah, I think that it's just being as objective as possible, right? And saying to yourself, when I'm listening back to this, do I think that it's concise? Do I think it's informative? Do I think it's entertaining? Do I think that it's high quality? If I wasn't me, would I listen to this? And you can very quickly kind of understand this is good quality or it's not good quality, right? And if you do that enough times, you consume enough content on the internet, you start to realize that this is what the good communicators do. This is what the bad communicators do. I want to emulate and be more like the good communicators.
That's a very good point. So one thing I struggle with communication is a lot of thoughts come into mind while I speak them. How do you bring all your thoughts that come into mind into or present them into words at the spur of the moment.
Got to tell a story, right? If I asked you right now, tell me your life story, you immediately know your whole life. All those ideas are in your head, but you probably would pick a way to tell it. You would either start now and go backwards. You may start in the beginning and go forwards, or you may just tell me what the highlights are, right? But like you would put together a story, even though all that information's in your head. And so a lot of times I think being able to tell a story is one of the core components of communication, but you can't allow the details to overwhelm the story, right? And so the story is the important part. It's what people remember, not all of the facts, data points, et cetera, that you got out in the conversation.
Yeah, I think storytelling is storytelling a part of good communication skills, or do they both come differently?
No, I think storytelling is the kind of foundation of communication, right? Where if I'm trying to convince my daughter to do something, I tell her a story, right? I show her why she should do it. It goes back to motivation and leadership, right? It's why are we doing this? Having people buy in, having people feel like it's something that they want to do, and not in a manipulative way. It's in a way of that's the same thing I want them to do with me, right? If somebody says to me, "Hey, I need you to do X," if they just tell me like send an email to this person, guess my first question is, why? What's the purpose? What's the point? What are we trying to accomplish, right? And so if you can do that, it ends up being much more effective.
I think that's very important. So one thing which I took from how you communicate is not really the technique, but you're kind of the Bitcoin guy of the internet. So, but you picked a controversial stance. So do you think the stance that you picked, it has helped you in gaining momentum?
I don't think I set out to be controversial. I think that I set out to just say what my opinion was. And there's a lot of people who took kind of the other side. Jury's out. We'll see, whether Bitcoin ends up being the thing that's successful or not. I tend to think so. But I think controversy, when you try to engineer controversy, I understand why people do it. That's just not my nature, right? I think my nature is much more, I try to think independently and critically. I'm not ashamed or scared to say my opinion publicly. And I understand that not everyone's going to agree with me all the time. Okay. And I'm still willing to do it. And so if that means that a lot of people disagree with me, that's okay too. There's been plenty of times in my life where a lot of people have disagreed with me and it's worked out. There's also been plenty of times where a lot of people have disagreed and it hasn't worked out.
Yeah.
I believe what I believe and I'm going to say it and we'll go from there.
So have you ever had to convince people into believing in what you say?
Yeah, every day. Right? I got to, every single time I say a statement, you got to convince people as to why that is something that they should agree with. And frankly, I seek out people who disagree more so than probably people who agree because I want to understand the other perspectives. They make me a better thinker. They make me kind of better at articulating this stuff and vice versa.
Wow, this is incredible. So I think we'll take a rapid fire part and then I'll let you go.
Perfect.
So let's start with the basic question of things that you're interested in. What is blockchain?
Blockchain is a distributed open source ledger that allows people to transact without a centralized third party.
And do you think blockchain, so Bitcoin is cryptocurrencies are built on top of blockchain. Do you think will they ever replace the currencies that we use completely?
For some people, they already have. I don't know if it'll be 100% of everyone, but for some people, it already has. And I think that number is growing bigger and bigger every day. But I don't necessarily think it's a zero-sum game. There's like 180 currencies in the world, and Bitcoin is one of them. And I think that it'll continue to become more popular, but it doesn't mean that all the other ones have to fail.
But why Bitcoin? Why not other cryptocurrencies?
Because Bitcoin is the only one that is truly decentralized, open source, and not controlled by anyone. And so when you look at those three components, it tends to be a key piece of creating value. And it seems to be that's what people trust. It also has the advantage of it's got the most brand awareness. It was the first kind of in this modern day of cryptocurrencies. And so there's a number of different factors why, but I think that one has the highest probability of being successful over a long period of time.
What is wrong with the modern financial system. Yeah. What is wrong with it?
We don't have enough time to talk through all that. I think that there's probably three things, right? The first is there's very much this like inequality system that's driven by a lack of financial education. And so if we could educate more people on how the financial system works, more people would be able to kind of protect themselves and actually benefit from it rather than be hurt. The second thing is that we have to make trade-offs between short-term and long-term impact. And so the incentive is to make short-term decisions that impact, today at the cost of the long-term. And then the third thing I think is we have a very interesting dynamic where there's 8 billion people in the world. They all have different aspirations and goals and businesses and lifestyles and all this stuff. And so everyone's trying to figure out how to create, one monetary policy to serve their constituents. And so in the United States, I don't know, there's like 2 billion people who use US dollars. And so we try to make one monetary policy to fit 2 billion people. That seems crazy to me. And so I tend to think that it's a complex thing. I don't envy the people who are in charge of this because I don't think it's a possible, successful situation. I think that it's an impossible task that we ask humans to do this, and they're doing the best that they can. I just tend to think that maybe machines will be better than humans.
Yeah, that's why you had Brett on the podcast. I think my last question will be, I'm 14. I've been reading about VCs and startups since I was 11. What do you think is one fact which will blow 11-year-old me, his mind? What do you think that one fact?
I think that capitalism is the single greatest solution to the world's problems because it uses human nature and incentives to inspire and motivate people to go and solve those problems. And so when you look at that system, there's a lot of people in today's society who want to demonize kind of capitalism and success. But what we have seen throughout history for literally thousands of years is that when you put the right incentive structure in place, people will take action that end up actually benefiting society. And so if we have these hard problems in society today, how do we solve them? We have to put the right incentive structure in place. I think capitalism does that. I think startups are one of the best ways for us to actually improve the world. And it's, this very inspiring, motivating thing where a small group of people come together to try the impossible. And if they are successful in face of the, kind of daunting odds, then they get the economic benefit from it. And I think that's exactly how the system should work.
Yeah, that blew 14-year-old me mind. All right. I think we'll take a hard stop here. This was incredible. It was my pleasure to have you on, Anthony. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah.
Not only did I enjoy it, I'm inspired by you. I'm going to go get some work done so that I can try to compete with you. You are who I compete with, right? You got an internet connection. You got a smart brain. You're resourceful and you're relentless. And so people who are listening to this have to understand they're competing with you. And that's a really scary thing. At 14 years old, I was not doing this. And so you got a long runway. So I'm incredibly proud of you. And I think that you got a bright future ahead. So keep it up and make sure that you just try to solve problems for people and you'll be in good shape.